Welcome. In this video, you will learn how to find inverse function values. You will verify an inverse function of ordered pairs. You'll graph a function. Given a graph of function, you'll find its inverse function. Given table values of the function, you'll find the inverse. So technically, we are just trying to find all different ways to understand inverse functions. To do that, let me go ahead and start with what exactly is an inverse function. Before we go ahead, let's go ahead and see what the function is. So here I have A, here I have B, right? These are my X, one is my X values, one is my Y values. So I'm going to say, let me put numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. And here I'm going to put A, B, C, D. For this to be a function, remember what the rule of function is. 1x should go to exactly 1y, right? 1x should go to exactly 1y. So here, I'm making sure 1x goes to exactly 1y. This is a function. Now, if I'm talking about inverse functions, then what am I doing? I am going backward. So this now becomes my x, and this now becomes my y. And I'm going from A to 1, A to 2, C to 3, and D to 4. But is this a function? No, this is not, because now my X values are A, B, C, D, and my Y values are 1, 2, 3, 4. So when you're finding the inverse, the X becomes the Y becomes the X. And look what happens. A is going to 1 and A is also going to 2. And what's the first rule for this to be a function? 1x should go to exactly 1y. So this is not a function. Now you might ask, Miss, why are you telling me something that is not an inverse function or not a function? That's a good segue to see the condition for an inverse function. So let me erase all of this. For a function to be or to find an inverse, for a function to have an inverse, the function has to be, I see a little mark here, the function has to be a 1-to-1 function. If not, you will encounter the same problem that we did. Now, let's go back in the reverse direction. A is going to 1, B is going to 2, C is going to 3, D is going to 4. And this is a function both ways. But if I did not have this, if 2 was also going to A, then the reverse operation would not be a function. So the number one condition for a function to have an inverse is it has to be a 1-to-1 function. And how do you find the inverse? So if I have a function f of x is equal to y, f of x is equal to y, then the inverse is represented as f inverse to the power -1. That's what they say it, f inverse of x. So this is a function f of x, and this is a function f inverse of x. Now, how do I know if the functions are inverses of one another? F, remember compositions? F of f inverse of x. If I composite two functions and if I end up with a value x, that means these two are inverse of one another. Don't worry, we'll do one step at a time. Now let's go ahead and talk about the function here. So let's see what we have. Let's start with the basic, right? That's how you build your knowledge way up. So the first one is verify inverse ordered pair. Very simple. Let me write this down. I have f. Let me zoom in here. I'm writing this part. F of 5 is equal to -2. They're asking us to write the corresponding inverse. That means this is my x and this is my y. My y becomes my x becomes my y. So how do I write it? F inverse of -2 is 5. So if you look closely here, f of 5 is 2. Going backward, f inverse of negative 2 is 5. Okay, let's try the next one. F of 3 is 1. That means f inverse to the power negative 1. F inverse, you write inverse as negative 1 to the power negative 1. So f inverse of 1 is, what is f inverse of 1? 3. Fair enough? So it's like this. You take an ordered pair. What are the numbers we have? We have 5 and negative 2, 3 and 1. So you're going from 5 to 2, negative 2, and 3 to 1. The inverse is going to be negative 2 to 5 and 1 to 3. Okay? That's another way of looking at it. Now let's go ahead and tackle these two here. What is this going to be? Inverse function f inverse of 9 is 7. Right? F inverse of 9 is 7. Now if I'm tackling this one, f inverse of 2 is negative 6. So you're just going backward. It says, given a graph of a function, find value of inverse functions. So they asked me to find f of negative 2 and f inverse of 2. So let's go back to the function. Where is the function? Right here, they're asking me to find f of 2 and f inverse of negative 2. Is that what they asked me? No, f of negative 2, f of negative 2, and f inverse of 2. So first, let's start with the function. Here, they're not asking me for inverse. They're just asking me to, hey, find the function value at negative 2. So my function value at, this is my negative 2, right? My function value at negative 2 is 4. So f of negative 2 is 4. Now look at the next one. They're saying find the inverse of 2. That means this is not my x value. This is my y value. So 2, this is my value 2. F inverse of 2, I'm going to go in the backward direction. F inverse of 2 is negative 1. Now, how do you know if it's the right one? Now, if you put a coordinate point, negative 1, comma 2, that should be on your graph. So this is negative 1. The respective value is 2. And the same thing here, 2 and negative 4. So when they ask you for inverse, instead of going from x, you go from the y. Let's try the next one. G of negative 3. This is just the function itself, not the inverse. That means I'm going to start with my x-axis. Negative 3. Where g of negative 3? G of negative 3 is a 0. That was easy. G of negative 3 is 0. Now they're asking me inverse. That means this is my y value. My y value is 3. What is the respective x value? 5. Do you see that? When they ask you for inverse, you start with your y. When they don't ask you for inverse, as usually you start with your x. Now you have to make sure you put this in the coordinate point and see if that's on the graph. 5, 3, check. Negative 3, 0, check. That means you're on the right track. Given table of values of a function, find values of the inverse function. The table should always be easy. I like the tables. They said f inverse of 4. So remember what you're going to start from. You're going to start from your y side, not from your x. Usually we look at the x values and we find the respective y values. But because it's the inverse, we will start from the y and work our way backward. Okay, so f inverse of 4. What is f inverse of 4? F inverse of 4 is 0. Next, f inverse of negative 1. F inverse of negative 1. What is f inverse of negative 1? 2. Fair enough? Let's try the next one. G of 0, remember you're starting from f values. G of 0, what is G of 0 here? G inverse of 0 is -1. G inverse of 2 is 4. If they don't say inverse, you start from the x value. Because it's inverse, you start from the y value. Okay, again, pause if you have any questions and rewind and make sure you understand.